Welcome to our video on outlining. We're going to talk about how you can write a better paper with less effort. Now you have your thesis, so what's the next step? I recommend outlining your paper, and I know that there are people who are thinking, why would I outline? That's just one more step. But in fact, outlining will help you save time. First, it helps you stick to your research, and you're able to ignore these rabbit trails that you might go down. On your outline, you identify the points that you're going to make, and that's what you're going to research. The internet and the NAU library can both be places with a lot of distractions, and you can find yourself going off on tangents. The outline will help you stay on point and help you work on supporting that thesis. In terms of writing your paper, it will help you avoid going on tangents. You want to keep your paper focused and following the thesis. And writing without an outline tends to lead to this stream of consciousness writing, which is not so bad if you're writing the next great novel, but it's not that great when you're writing a research paper. It also helps you stick to that adage, when in doubt, leave it out, which is one of my favorite sayings because it is very true. We don't need the kitchen sink thrown at us, and moreover, throwing the kitchen sink at your instructor doesn't demonstrate that you know the subject better. It actually does the opposite. So working from an outline will help you stay on point throughout your paper. It'll also help you create a presentation that is coherent and a paper that flows logically. So when working from an outline, you avoid those instances where you take two steps forward and then go back and say, oh, as I stated earlier. In a 5-page paper, you should never have to repeat yourself. If you're working from an outline, you can create that flow in your outline and you'll never have to do those little awkward repeating yourself moments. And finally, it allows you to build the content requirements into your paper so that you make sure that you've met all of those requirements. Of course, there are going to be students who think, well, anybody who works in education thinks that you should outline. So I've pulled a quote from the APA manual that kind of supports what we said on the last slide about why you should outline. Writing from an outline helps preserve the logic of the research itself. An outline identifies main ideas, defines subordinate ideas, helps you discipline your writing and avoid tangential excursions, and helps you notice omissions. In an outline, you can also identify the subheadings for the article itself. Okay, so let's talk about the logistics of organizing. You'll need some sort of organizational system, and we'll show you some examples here shortly. And there are many different ways to organize as far as what kind of physical system you want to use. But the idea is that you're going to break your paper up into major parts and then break those major parts up into smaller parts, which can be broken into smaller parts and into smaller parts. And you essentially apply this system that you choose to the thesis that you're discussing. And you'll want to make sure that the way that you organize it reflects the method of development that you're using. For example, if you're writing a paper on the history of something, you may want to organize your paper chronologically. Then comes the actual breaking down into elements. So you coordinate your major points. And by this, I mean, let's say that you're writing a paper about a particular organization. You might coordinate your paper by breaking it up into departments. And then you create the subordinate parts, which is where you take your departments and break them up into subdepartments or into teams. And I'll show you some examples on the next couple of slides that will help clarify this. So here are some examples of commonly used systems for organizing. Roman numerals followed by letters, followed by numbers, followed by small letters. And so you would have the major coordinating ideas next to the Roman numeral, and then you would break that down to the capital letter level, and then break that down to the number level. And essentially what you could do is you could organize your paper down to the very sentence by using this system. You don't have to go that far, but you definitely could organize a paper all the way down to the individual sentences using an outline. And here's another way to look at that particular format. But again, there are many different kinds of formats. These are just the most common ones. So here's an example that I created just for this video, and I decided that my topic was going to be Doctor Who. So if my topic is Doctor Who, and I decided to talk about the evolution of the character of Doctor Who, and since I'm talking about evolution, that basically is talking about time, so I decided on a chronological approach. And the way that I decided to organize my paper was I thought that I would break it up into the intro, the body, and the conclusion. And you can do this on pretty much every paper. The intro is going to be your first Roman numeral or your first coordinate, and then your conclusion will be the last, and then your body is the middle. So obviously it's the body that's going to be broken up into smaller and smaller parts. So from the body, I decided, well, there's essentially two different time periods with Doctor Who. There were the early years, and then there was a very long break, and then there's the new era. So I decided to break it up into the early Doctors and then the new Doctors. And then from there, I broke it down into basically groups of 3 to 4 doctors. So I have 1963 to 74, and these are the 3 doctors that played, the 3 actors that played the Doctor then, and then the next of the early doctors. And I could even go in further and break these down and create another level where I have the actor, and then I can break it down to things like auditioning and the type of doctor that he played. So you can continue to break these down, as I said earlier, to almost the very sentences that you'll include. So the example that I just created on the previous slide is really, it's just one of many, many different ways to create an outline. There are different lettering systems. We use the Roman numeral, but in some cases there might be a decimal system or one that's based completely on letters. In some cases, people may write outlines where they write incomplete sentences, or they may just use phrases. There are different ways to develop your point. As we mentioned earlier, things like you can use chronological order, you can use order of importance, you can use departments, you can use geographical regions. I recommend going online and doing a search for outlining a research paper, and you'll see that there are thousands of examples and so many different ways to do it. Ultimately, you want to find a system that works for you. I admit that I outline on most things that I do, but I'll also admit that my outlines tend to be very informal unless it's something that I'm going to show to someone else. And I recommend the same thing for you. That you will have assignments where you need to provide an outline, and in those cases your outline needs to make sense to your instructor, but in other cases your outline really only needs to make sense to you. Find something that you can work with. Successful use of an outline will help you meet those requirements for your paper and will help keep you focused when doing your research and your writing. For those of you taking MT 6255, Leadership and Quality, you will have to do an outline as part of LP1. I ask that if you've watched this video, if you could add a little note at the bottom of your paper so that we can collect some research on how many students use the outline, it would be very helpful. If you watch the video on developing a thesis, I'm going to share a link with you guys so that you can take a look at the outline that evolved from the thesis statement in the last video. Well, that's all I have on outlining. I'll see you in our next tutorial when we talk about writing your first draft.